Hey everyone, long-time lurker, first-time poster. I never thought I'd be sharing my life here, but I don't know where else to turn. I need to get this out, and maybe someone out there has been through something similar and can offer advice. Or at least tell me I'm not losing my mind. My name's Timothy, I'm 32, and I grew up in Byron Bay, Australia. Small town, beautiful beaches, tight-knit community, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone's business. At 18, I became a dad. Maddie was the best thing to ever happen to me. Shauna, my high school sweetheart and Maddie's mom, and I tried to make it work. We got married young, built a life together, but eventually, love turned into something more like teamwork. We divorced when Maddie was 6, but it wasn't one of those nasty splits. We stayed friends, co-parented well, and honestly, I still considered Shauna one of my closest friends. In my early 20s, I started my own company. It did well. Better than I could have dreamed. I put in the hours, sacrificed weekends, holidays, relationships, all for Maddie's future and my own peace of mind. Life settled into a routine, and honestly, it was good. Simple, steady, predictable. And then, Bridget came along. She was vibrant, full of life, and made me feel like I was 18 again. We met through mutual friends at a barbecue, and from that day, she was all I could think about. We started dating, and before I knew it, I was head over heels. I introduced her to Maddie, to Shauna, to my parents. Everyone seemed to like her, and for the first time in years, I let myself believe that maybe I could have it all: a successful business, a loving relationship, and a happy daughter. But here's where everything starts to crack. Last Saturday, Maddie had a sleepover at a friend's house, so I decided to swing by Shauna's place to drop off some documents she needed for Maddie's school enrollment. When I got there, she invited me in for coffee. We sat on her porch, the kids playing down the street, and that's when she said it. "Tim, I need to tell you something, and I don't know how to start." She looked pale, nervous. I felt my stomach drop before she even continued. "It's about Bridget." I won't lie, my first thought was that maybe Bridget had said something rude about Shauna, or there'd been some weird tension I hadn't noticed. But Shauna pulled out an envelope from under the table, pushed it towards me, and said, "You need to see this." I didn't want to open it. The weight of it felt heavy in my hands, like it was alive, like whatever was inside could change everything. And it did. Photos. Screenshots. Messages. Bridget, with another man. Multiple times. Different places. It wasn't just physical either. There were messages, intimate ones where she mocked me, lied to me, played me for a fool. I don't remember much after that. I just sat there, staring at the evidence while Shauna spoke softly, telling me she had debated whether to show me or not. But she couldn't let me continue living in the dark. The worst part? The affair had been going on for months, and I'd missed every single sign. Shauna put a hand on my shoulder as I sat there, frozen. "I'm so sorry, Tim. I haven't confronted Bridget yet. I haven't told anyone else." I drove home, sat in my car for hours, and then poured myself a drink, or 5. What do I even do now? How do you look someone in the eye when you know they've been lying to your face for months? And why does it hurt so much when I've been through heartbreak before? Alright, here goes nothing. After sitting with that envelope for what felt like forever, I knew I couldn't avoid Bridget forever. The weight of what I'd seen, it wasn't something I could just shove in a drawer and pretend didn't exist. The next day, Bridget came over to my place. She had one of those big, carefree smiles on her face, carrying a bag of groceries. "Thought I'd make us dinner tonight," she said, like everything was fine. Like my whole world hadn't just flipped upside down. I stood there, staring at her, and I must have looked awful because her smile started to fade. "Tim? Are you okay?" I couldn't do it right there, not with her standing in my kitchen, unpacking vegetables like we were in some rom-com montage. So I said, "We need to talk. Sit down." She hesitated, but did as I asked. I pulled out the envelope Shauna had given me and placed it on the table between us. Her eyes flicked down to it, then back up to me, her face already pale. "What's this?" she asked, her voice shaking just slightly. "You tell me, Bridget." She didn't reach for it. Didn't open it. Instead, she started fidgeting with the hem of her sweater. "Tim, whatever's in there, it's not what it looks like." That line. It's not what it looks like. Like I hadn't seen the screenshots, the timestamps, the hotel receipts. Like I hadn't seen pictures. "Open it," I said. She didn't. She just started crying, quietly at first, then full-on sobbing into her hands. I don't know what I expected her to do, maybe deny it, maybe try to argue her way out of it, but this felt pathetic. "Who is he?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She looked up at me, her mascara running down her cheeks. "Tim, please." It didn't mean anything. It was just, I was lonely. You were always working, always distracted. I felt invisible. That hit me harder than I expected. I've heard those lines before from movies, from friends recounting their breakups, but hearing it from Bridget? After everything I'd given her, my time, my trust, introducing her to my daughter, it felt like someone poured boiling water over my chest. "Who is he?" I repeated, sharper this time. She hesitated again. And then she said his name. It wasn't just some random guy from Tinder. It wasn't a stranger or a coworker. It was Ryan. One of my oldest friends. A guy I'd had beers with, a guy who'd been to my house, a guy who Maddie called Uncle Ryan. I felt something snap inside me. I stood up so fast the chair screeched against the floor. Bridget flinched. "You're telling me it was Ryan?" She nodded, sniffling, looking like a little kid caught stealing candy. "Tim, please." No, you don't get to Tim, please me." My voice cracked, and I hated how vulnerable I sounded. "You didn't just cheat on me. You did it with someone I trusted. Someone Maddie trusts. Do you know how disgusting this is? How humiliating?" She started saying something else, but I couldn't hear it anymore. My ears were ringing, my vision was blurry, and my chest felt tight. I needed air. I needed to get away from her. I grabbed my keys and walked out. She was still crying when I shut the door behind me. I drove aimlessly for hours, up and down roads I've driven 1,000 times before. The sun set, the streets went quiet, and still, I couldn't bring myself to go home. At some point, I parked near the beach and just sat there, staring at the waves crashing under the moonlight. My phone buzzed. It was Shauna. "Are you okay? Did you talk to her?" I didn't reply. What could I even say? How do you even start to process something like this? I didn't sleep that night. I just sat on the couch, staring at the envelope Shauna had given me. The photos, the messages, all of it felt like it was screaming at me from across the room. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Bridget's face, her fake little smile, the way her voice cracked when she said Ryan's name. At around 6 a.m., I got a text from Shauna. "Did you sleep? Maddie's asking if you're picking her up today." Maddie. God, I'd almost forgotten about her in the middle of all this chaos. She was supposed to come home today, and the last thing I wanted was for her to see me like this, puffy eyes, unshaven, wearing the same clothes from yesterday. I texted Shauna back, "Yeah, I'll pick her up. Thanks for checking in." I showered, shaved, and tried to look presentable, I guess. But nothing could hide the exhaustion and hurt on my face. When I pulled into Shauna's driveway, Maddie came running out, her little backpack bouncing against her shoulders. "Dad," she yelled, throwing herself into my arms. For a brief second, I felt okay. Like nothing had changed. Shauna came out onto the porch, arms crossed, watching me carefully. "You look like hell, Tim." "Yeah, well, it's been a long night," I said. She hesitated for a second, then walked down the steps and lowered her voice. "Did you confront her?" I nodded. "Yeah. It was Ryan." Her eyes went wide, and she sucked in a sharp breath. "Ryan? You're Ryan?" "Yeah. My Ryan." She shook her head, muttering something under her breath. "I'm so sorry, Tim." Before I could say anything else, Maddie grabbed my hand. "Dad, let's go. I want to show you the picture I drew." I gave Shauna a weak smile and led Maddie to the car. The whole drive home, she was talking about some art project she did, showing me crayon drawings of stick figures on the back of a napkin. I nodded along, said things like, "That's amazing, Mads, and you're so talented," but my brain was somewhere else entirely. When we got home, Bridget's car was still parked in the driveway. Maddie noticed it immediately. "Is Bridget here? Can I show her my drawing too?" Panic hit me. Bridget's busy right now, sweetheart. Why don't you go inside and put your drawing on the fridge? I'll be right in." She gave me a confused look but nodded and skipped inside. Bridget was sitting on the couch when I walked in, clutching a mug of tea like it was some kind of shield. She'd been crying, her eyes red and swollen. "Why are you still here?" I asked, keeping my voice low so Maddie wouldn't hear. I wanted to talk. I wanted to explain. There's nothing to explain, Bridget. You slept with my friend. You lied to me. You made me look like a fool. What could you possibly say right now that would make any of this better? She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Just a shaky breath. You need to leave, I said firmly. But Tim. No. I mean it. Maddie's home now, and I'm not letting her see, whatever this is. Grab your stuff and go. I'll send you anything you leave behind. She stared at me for a long moment, like she was trying to come up with something, some magic sentence that would fix everything. But eventually, she nodded. I watched her pack up her things. She tried to say goodbye before she left, but I turned away, focusing on the sound of Maddie humming from the kitchen. The door clicked shut behind her, and just like that, she was gone. For the rest of the day, I poured all my energy into Maddie. We watched her favorite movie, made pancakes for dinner, and I let her stay up an hour past her bedtime. Anything to keep my mind off Bridget and Ryan. But once Maddie was asleep, and the house was quiet again, it all came crashing back down. I picked up my phone, my fingers hovering over Ryan's contact. Part of me wanted to call him, scream at him, demand answers. But another part of me, some pathetic broken part, just wanted to know why. Instead, I threw my phone across the room and sank onto the couch. How do you even start to rebuild after something like this? How do you look your kid in the eye and pretend everything's fine when your whole world feels like it's been ripped apart? I don't know, but I guess I'll find out. I wasn't going to do it. I promised myself I wouldn't. But at midnight, sitting in the dark with nothing but the hum of the fridge in the background, I called Ryan. He picked up on the second ring. Tim, mate, No. Don't mate me. Just, why, Ryan? Why her? Why me? There was silence. Then a sigh. I don't know, Tim. It just happened. It happened. I repeated, my voice shaking. You happened to betray your best friend? You happened to sleep with the woman I was building a life with. More silence. You were supposed to be my friend, I said, barely above a whisper. I'm sorry, Tim. That's not good enough. I hung up before he could say anything else. For a while, I just sat there, phone still in my hand, staring at nothing. Turns out, I'm sorry, doesn't feel nearly as satisfying as you'd think. The next morning, Shauna showed up unannounced. She had Maddie's favorite hoodie in her hand and a look on her face that told me she wasn't just here for a casual chat. You look like hell, Tim, she said, stepping inside. Yeah, well, it's becoming my signature look. She set the hoodie on the counter and crossed her arms. Did you talk to him? I nodded. Yeah. He said it just happened. She winced, like the words stung her too. Coward's excuse. We sat at the kitchen table, two people who had once been married, now connected by a shared sense of betrayal. Are you okay? She asked softly. No. Not even close. Shauna nodded, her eyes glassy. It's going to hurt for a long time, Tim. But you've got Maddie, and she needs you to keep it together. I glanced toward Maddie's room, where I could hear her softly singing along to some cartoon theme song. She's the only thing keeping me upright right now. Shauna gave my hand a quick squeeze before standing up. Take it one day at a time, okay? And if you need anything, I'm just a call away. When she left, the house felt quieter than usual. Maddie's laughter floated in from her room, and I realized Shauna was right. No matter how broken I felt, Maddie couldn't see me fall apart. One day at a time. That's all I could do. Byron Bay's a small town. News spreads faster than wildfire, and apparently, my news was the hottest gossip in weeks. At the grocery store, people gave me those pitying glances, the kind where they pretend not to stare but their eyes linger a second too long. At the cafe, two women actually stopped talking when I walked in. I felt like a walking punchline. Ryan, though? He'd vanished. His social media was deactivated, his usual hangouts empty. Coward couldn't even face me, or the consequences. Shauna called me later that afternoon. Have you heard what people are saying? No, but I can imagine. Someone told me Bridget's been spinning her own version of things, making it sound like you were distant, cold, like you pushed her to do it. That hit me like a brick to the chest. I laughed bitterly. Of course. Why take responsibility when you can rewrite the story? Shauna's voice softened. Don't let it get to you, Tim. The people who matter know the truth. But that's the thing about small-town gossip. It doesn't matter who knows the truth. The whispers still sting. After I hung up, I looked out the window at Maddie playing in the yard. She doesn't know yet. She doesn't know how people are talking about her dad, about Bridget. I have to keep it together, for her. For myself. But man, it's getting harder every day. A week passed. The silence from Ryan and Bridget was deafening. No texts, no calls, nothing. They both just disappeared. You'd think after blowing up my entire life, they'd at least have the decency to face me. One evening, Shauna dropped Maddie off after school. Maddie ran inside, leaving Shauna lingering by the door. "Ryan's back in town," she said quietly. I froze. What? He's been spotted at the pub. Alone. Looks rough. For a moment, I imagined walking into that pub, grabbing him by the collar, and demanding answers. But what would it change? He'd still be the guy who stabbed me in the back. "Are you going to talk to him?" Shauna asked. "No," I said, jaw clenched. "What's the point? He's not sorry. If he was, he would have come to me already." Shauna nodded, her expression heavy. "You deserve better than people like them, Tim." That night, after Maddie went to bed, I sat on the couch staring at my phone. A part of me hoped Ryan, or even Bridget, would text me. Something. Anything. But nothing came. No apology. No closure. Just silence. And honestly, I think that hurt more than anything they'd already done. I wasn't going to do it. I told myself over and over that I wasn't going to sink to that level, that I was better than confronting him in public. But Byron Bay isn't a city where you can hide forever. And honestly, I don't even know if I was looking for closure or just an excuse to finally let out all the anger boiling inside me. Shauna had mentioned the pub. The pub. Our pub. The one Ryan and I used to go to every Friday night after work, throwing back beers and talking nonsense until closing time. It felt like a cruel joke that he'd show up there, knowing I might walk in. But I went anyway. It was a Thursday night, quieter than the weekends, but still busy enough to blend into the crowd. I walked in, hands in my jacket pockets, scanning the room. And there he was, in the corner nursing a beer, staring into it like it held all the answers he'd been searching for. His hair was messier than usual, and he looked thinner, like he hadn't been eating or sleeping well. For a brief second, a flicker of pity sparked in me. But then I remembered Bridget. The envelope. The texts. His name coming out of her mouth. I walked over. He didn't notice me until I was practically at his table. His eyes flicked up, and his whole face went pale. "Tim," he said, voice barely above a whisper. I pulled out the chair across from him and sat down, folding my arms on the table. "You're back." He swallowed hard. "Yeah, I'm back." For a minute, neither of us said anything. The pub noises around us felt distant, like we were in some soundproof bubble. "You know," I started, keeping my voice low, "if you had just come to me, if you had told me, it wouldn't have made this any easier, but I might have been able to respect you a little." His eyes darted away, shame washing over his face. "I didn't mean for it to happen, Tim. I swear I didn't." "Yeah, that's what she said too. It just happened. That's what you both settled on, huh? The easiest excuse." He didn't say anything. "You were my best friend, Ryan. Do you get that? My best friend. You were family to Maddie. You sat at my dinner table, you came to birthday parties. You were part of our lives." My voice cracked slightly, and I hated how vulnerable I sounded. "I know," he mumbled. "No, you don't know. Because if you did, you wouldn't have done it. And you definitely wouldn't have kept doing it for months behind my back." He finally looked up at me, and I could see tears welling in his eyes. "I messed up, Tim. I know I did. And I've thought about reaching out every day since you found out, but what could I even say? Nothing would make it right. Then why now? Why are you back here, Ryan? Did you think I wouldn't show up? Or did you want me to find you here?" He shook his head. "I don't know. I thought maybe I could just disappear for a while and come back when things had blown over." I leaned back in my chair, letting out a bitter laugh. "You thought this would blow over? You think I'll just forget about this and we'll grab a beer someday and laugh about how you slept with my girlfriend? You're delusional." The silence stretched between us again. He stared down at his beer, while I stared at him. This hollow version of the guy I'd once called my best friend. "You ruined everything," I said finally, my voice low but steady. "You didn't just break my trust, you broke Maddie's. You broke Shauna's. You destroyed something that can't ever be put back together. And for what, Ryan? Did you love her? Were you planning to run off into the sunset together? He flinched. No. It wasn't. It wasn't like that. Then what was it like? I pressed. He had no answer. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. A couple of people turned to look, but I didn't care. Don't come near me, Ryan. Don't come near Maddie. Don't ever speak to Shauna again. You're dead to me. I walked away without looking back, out the door and into the cool night air. My hands were shaking, my chest tight, and every part of me felt like I was going to explode. I stood by my car, breathing heavily, trying to calm myself down. I thought I'd feel better after confronting him, like I'd finally get some closure. But all I felt was empty. He wasn't sorry, not really. If he was, he wouldn't have let it happen in the first place. When I got home, Maddie was already asleep, her little face peaceful in the glow of her nightlight. I sat beside her bed for a while, just watching her, feeling like the worst parts of the world couldn't touch her here. But one day, she'll ask me why Bridget isn't around anymore. She'll ask why Uncle Ryan stopped coming by. And I don't know how I'll answer. It had been almost 2 weeks since I confronted Ryan at the pub. 2 weeks of dragging myself through the motions, pretending everything was fine in front of Maddie, and collapsing onto the couch at night, staring at the ceiling until sunrise. Shauna had been checking in regularly, dropping off homemade meals, little snacks for Maddie, quiet ways of showing she was still in my corner. But even with her support, the weight of it all felt heavier by the day. Then Maddie asked the question. We were sitting at the kitchen table one evening. She was drawing, her tongue sticking out slightly in concentration as she colored in a flower. Out of nowhere, she looked up at me with those big, curious eyes and said, "Dad, how come Bridget hasn't come over in a while?" I froze. My fork halfway to my mouth, my heart somewhere in my throat. She's been busy, sweetheart. Work stuff, I said, trying to sound casual. Maddie's brow furrowed. Is she mad at you? God. Kids have a way of asking the simplest questions that cut straight through you. No, Mads. She's not mad at me. Sometimes people just aren't meant to be in our lives forever. She stared at me for a second, her little head tilted to the side. Did she hurt you, Dad? I had to look away. I couldn't let her see the tears welling up in my eyes. No, baby. I'm okay. Don't worry about me, all right? How about we go get ice cream after dinner? Her face lit up immediately, and just like that, the weight of her question seemed to lift off her little shoulders. But it stayed firmly on mine. That night, after she was asleep, I sat on the edge of my bed with my head in my hands. Maddie deserved the truth, or at least some version of it, but how do you tell your daughter that someone she liked, someone she trusted, had completely shattered her dad? Shauna called me around midnight. I answered on the second ring. She asked about Bridget today, I said quietly. Oh, Tim. I didn't know what to say. How do you even explain something like this to a kid? Shauna sighed. You don't. Not yet. You tell her what she needs to hear to feel safe and loved. The rest can wait until she's older. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. I just hate lying to her, Shauna. It's not lying, Tim. It's protecting her. After we hung up, I walked into Maddie's room and sat beside her bed again. She was fast asleep, her little hand clutching her stuffed bunny. I whispered more to myself than to her, I'm going to be better for you, Mads. I promise. But promises feel hollow when you're not even sure how to keep them. I thought the worst was over. I thought the silence from Bridget and Ryan was the end of it. But life has a cruel sense of humor because yesterday morning, I found a letter in my mailbox. No stamp, no address, just my name scrawled in Bridget's handwriting. I stared at it for a long time, standing in my driveway, the sun already beating down on my neck. Part of me wanted to rip it up right there. Another part, some pathetic, masochistic part, needed to know what she had to say. So I took it inside, sat at the kitchen table, and opened it. Tim. I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from, but I couldn't leave things like this. I owe you the truth, even if it's too late. What I did was unforgivable. There's no excuse, and I won't try to make one. But I need you to know. I never wanted to hurt you. You were good to me, Tim. You were good to Maddie. And I threw it all away for something that wasn't worth it. Ryan wasn't worth it. It started small. Conversations that felt innocent. Compliments that made me feel seen when I was feeling invisible. And I let it snowball. I let it happen. I let it keep happening. I know saying sorry won't fix anything. I hope one day, you'll believe me when I say that I did love you. And I'm so sorry for what I did to you. Take care of Maddie. She's lucky to have you. Bridget. I sat there for a long time after finishing the letter. It felt empty, hollow, like she'd written it just to ease her own guilt. She said she loved me, but love isn't supposed to hurt like this. Love isn't supposed to feel like a knife in your back. I folded the letter and shoved it into the junk drawer by the fridge. Out of sight, but not out of mind. Later that evening, Shauna called again. She's become sort of a lifeline lately, checking in, making sure Maddie and I are okay. She left a letter, I said flatly. Did you read it? Yeah. What did it say? The usual. She's sorry. She didn't mean to hurt me. She still loved me. You know, all the hits. Shauna was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Do you believe her?" I thought about that. Did I? Could I? I don't know. And honestly, I don't think it matters. Sorry doesn't fix anything. That night, after Maddie went to bed, I poured myself a drink and sat on the back porch. The stars were out, the air was cool, and for a brief moment, I let myself breathe. Maybe this is what healing looks like, little moments where the hurt quiets down, where the weight feels just a bit lighter. But it's still there. And I'm still carrying it. I thought I was handling things pretty well, or at least pretending to. Maddie was happy, Shauna was supportive, and the town gossip seemed to die down a bit. But grief doesn't move in a straight line, does it? It sneaks up on you when you least expect it. It hit me on a random Tuesday. Maddie was at school, and I was supposed to be working from home. But instead, I found myself staring at my laptop screen, unable to focus on a single email. The junk drawer caught my eye, the one where I'd shoved Bridget's letter. I don't know what made me do it, but I pulled it out and read it again. Every word felt like salt on an open wound. I did love you. What a joke. If this was love, I wanted nothing to do with it. Before I realized what I was doing, I grabbed the letter and stormed out to the backyard. I lit the edge of it with a lighter and watched it curl and blacken until it was nothing but ash on the grass. But burning the letter didn't burn the memories. It didn't burn the image of Ryan sitting across from me at the pub, stammering out excuses. It didn't burn away the months Bridget spent lying to my face. I was still shaking when Shauna called. "Hey Tim. You okay?" "No Shauna, I'm not okay," I snapped, instantly regretting how sharp my voice came out. There was a pause before she spoke again, softer this time. "What happened?" I burned her letter. And it didn't help. Nothing helps. I feel like I'm carrying around this weight, and no matter what I do, I can't put it down. Shauna sighed on the other end of the line. "It's not going to go away overnight, Tim. You've been betrayed in one of the worst ways possible. But you're still here. You're still showing up for Maddie. That counts for something." Her words should have comforted me, but they didn't. I just wanted to stop, Shauna. The anger, the hurt, the constant replaying of every moment in my head. I wanted to stop. I know. But you have to give yourself time. After we hung up, I sat down on the grass in my backyard and stared at the ash where Bridget's letter used to be. Time. Everyone keeps saying that. Give it time. You'll heal with time. But time doesn't erase what happened. It just stretches it out, makes it quieter, turns it into something you carry in the background instead of the foreground. Later that afternoon, I picked Maddie up from school. She climbed into the car, her hair messy from running around with her friends, and gave me a big smile. "Hi, Dad." "Hey, kiddo," I said, forcing a smile back. As I watched her in the rearview mirror, happily kicking her feet and chatting about her day, I realized something. Maddie is my anchor. She's the reason I get out of bed, the reason I keep going. I don't know when this pain is going to fade, or if it ever will, but I know one thing for sure, I can't let it consume me. Not for her. Not for me. Tomorrow, I'll get up again. I'll make breakfast, drive her to school, and face another day. One day at a time. That's all I can do. The days blurred into weeks. Life settled into something that felt normal but wasn't. I took Maddie to school, made her favorite pancakes on Saturdays, and worked as much as I could to keep my mind from wandering. Shauna checked in often, always finding some excuse to stop by, dropping off a casserole, picking up a forgotten hoodie, or just sitting on the porch with me in comfortable silence. But no matter how much routine I forced into my life, the hurt sat there. It clung to me like smoke after a fire. Then came Friday afternoon. I was sitting in my office, half focused on an email, when there was a knock at the front door. I assumed it was Shauna or maybe a delivery driver, but when I opened it, I froze. It was Bridget. She stood there in a loose sweater and jeans, her hair pulled into a messy bun. She looked tired, more tired than I'd ever seen her. Her eyes were red like she'd been crying, and she was clutching her phone so tightly her knuckles were white. "Tim," she said softly. "What are you doing here, Bridget?" My voice came out sharper than I intended, but I couldn't stop it. I needed to see you. Please. Just give me 5 minutes. I wanted to slam the door in her face. I wanted to tell her to get lost, to scream at her until my throat went raw. But instead, I stepped aside and let her in. She walked into the living room and stood awkwardly by the couch, like she didn't know what to do with her hands. I stayed by the door, arms crossed, putting as much space between us as possible. "You've got 5 minutes," I said. She took a shaky breath and nodded. "I know I shouldn't be here. I know I'm probably the last person you want to see. But I can't. I can't keep carrying this without saying something to your face. Bridget, you already said everything in your letter. What could you possibly add now?" Her lip trembled, and she looked down at the floor. "I hate myself for what I did to you. I've been carrying this guilt, and no matter what I do, it won't go away. I see your face every time I close my eyes, Tim. I hear your voice in my head, and it's like this weight that's crushing me." I clenched my jaw, trying to keep my anger in check. "Good. You should feel guilty." "I know," she whispered. "But it's more than that. I wanted to tell you that I've cut all contact with Ryan. Completely. I blocked him, deleted every trace of him from my life. I'm trying to fix myself, Tim, but I can't do that without knowing if you'll ever forgive me." I let out a hollow laugh. "Forgive you? You want forgiveness? Bridget, you didn't just cheat. You lied to me for months. You smiled at me, held my hand, told me you loved me, all while sneaking around with someone I trusted. How do you come back from that? How does anyone forgive that?" She flinched like I'd slapped her. Her shoulders slumped, and for a second, I thought she might collapse right there in my living room. "I'm not asking you to forget, Tim. I'm asking if there's ever a chance you'll look at me and not hate me." I stared at her for a long time, feeling so many emotions I couldn't name them all. Anger, sadness, pity, exhaustion. "I don't hate you, Bridget," I said finally. "I wish I did. It would make this easier. But I don't. I don't have anything left for you. Whatever we had, whatever I felt for you, it's gone. And I don't think it's ever coming back." Her eyes welled up with tears, and she nodded slowly. "I understand." She turned to leave, but before she stepped out the door, she paused. "Tim, you're a good man. Maddie is so lucky to have you. Don't let what I did change that." And then she was gone. I stood there for a long time, staring at the door like it might swing open again. But it didn't. When Maddie got home later, I plastered on a smile and helped her with her homework. We watched her favorite movie and ate ice cream straight from the tub. But that night, after she went to bed, I sat in the dark living room with a glass of whiskey in my hand, Bridget's words echoing in my head. "Don't let what I did change that." But how could it not? How could something so sharp, so deep, not leave scars? I leaned back against the couch, staring up at the ceiling. Forgiveness felt impossible. Moving on felt even harder. But Maddie deserved better. Tomorrow, I'd get up. Tomorrow, I'd keep going. One day at a time, the days after Bridget's visit felt heavier somehow, like her words had cracked open a door I wasn't ready to walk through. I kept replaying what she said, her guilt, her tears, the way she looked so small standing in my living room. But every time I started to feel even a flicker of sympathy, the memories would come back. The screenshots, the late nights she lied about, the way Ryan's name felt like poison on my tongue. I couldn't let myself forget. Not yet. Shauna noticed something was off when she stopped by a few days later. Maddie was in the living room watching cartoons, and Shauna cornered me in the kitchen as I loaded the dishwasher. "You've been quiet," she said softly. "I'm fine." She raised an eyebrow. "Tim. Come on." I sighed, leaning against the counter. Bridget came by. Shauna froze, her eyes narrowing slightly. She what? She wanted to talk. Said she's cut Ryan out of her life, said she feels guilty. Asked if I could ever forgive her. Shauna crossed her arms and looked away for a moment before speaking. And? What did you say? That I don't hate her, but whatever we had is gone. It's empty now. She nodded slowly, her lips pressed into a thin line. Good. Because you deserve better than someone who could do that to you, Tim. And Maddie deserves better too. I know, I said quietly. But it's not as easy as just flipping a switch, Shauna. I can't just decide to stop caring overnight. She walked over and put a hand on my arm. No one expects you to. But don't let her words mess with your head. She made her choices, Tim. You didn't deserve any of this. I nodded, but the knot in my chest didn't ease. That night, after Maddie went to bed, I poured myself a drink and sat on the porch. The stars were bright, the air crisp, and for a moment, everything felt still. But my mind wouldn't quiet down. I thought about the years I'd spent building something with Bridget. The moments that felt real, the laughter, the plans for the future. Were all of those moments a lie? Or did they mean something to her, even if she threw them away in the end? And Ryan, the betrayal from him felt deeper somehow, sharper. We'd been friends for over a decade. He knew me, knew my struggles, knew how hard I worked to build a stable life after Shauna and I split. And still, he made those choices. I stared at my phone on the table beside me. For a second, I considered calling Ryan again, yelling at him until my throat went raw, demanding answers he couldn't possibly give me. But instead, I turned my phone over and looked out at the night sky. Shauna was right. This wasn't something I could rush through. Healing isn't linear, and some days were going to be harder than others. But Maddie needed me. And I needed me. I finished my drink, set the glass down, and took a deep breath. Tomorrow, I'd get up. I'd make Maddie breakfast. I'd go to work. One day at a time. And maybe, just maybe, I'd start to feel a little lighter. The weeks crept by, and slowly, very slowly, life started to feel quieter. Not better, not healed, but less raw. The wound wasn't bleeding anymore. It was just a dull ache I carried around. Maddie was my anchor through it all. Every smile, every laugh, every messy art project stuck to the fridge reminded me that life didn't stop just because mine felt like it had shattered. One Saturday morning, Shauna texted me. Shauna, hey, we're having a beach day. You and Maddie should come. I hesitated. Shauna had been great, better than great honestly, but every time we hung out, there was this unspoken weight between us. Like she was worried I'd fall apart if she said the wrong thing. But Maddie caught sight of my phone. Are we going to the beach, Dad? Please, please, please. How could I say no to that face? The beach was packed, the kind of sunny day Byron Bay is famous for. Maddie ran ahead with Shauna's son, Liam, their excited screams blending with the sound of crashing waves. Shauna and I set up towels under a beach umbrella. She sat cross-legged, sunglasses perched on her head, watching the kids. Thanks for coming, she said softly. Yeah. It's nice to be out, I admitted. For a while, we just sat there, watching the water, feeling the warmth of the sun. And for a brief moment, I felt something close to peace. You know, Shauna said, breaking the silence, you're doing better, Tim. I raised an eyebrow. Better? Yeah. You're showing up, you're taking care of Maddie, and you're not letting this mess define you. That takes strength. I let out a small laugh, shaking my head. It doesn't feel like strength, Shauna. Most days, it feels like survival. She turned to face me, her expression serious. Survival is strength. Don't sell yourself short. The kids came running back, dripping wet and covered in sand, begging for ice cream. Shauna laughed and pulled cash out of her beach bag. Go on, you two. Bring your dad back something chocolate, she said with a wink. As Maddie and Liam ran toward the ice cream stand, Shauna leaned back on her elbows, tilting her face toward the sun. You ever think about what's next, Tim? She asked casually. Next? I repeated. Yeah. Like, dating again. Or meeting someone new. I snorted. Shauna, I'm barely holding it together most days. The idea of putting myself out there again feels impossible. She nodded, her lips forming a tight line. I get that. But don't close yourself off forever, okay? You're a good man, Tim. Someone out there will see that. I didn't respond. I didn't know how to respond. But as I sat there, watching Maddie lick her ice cream cone while Liam made a mess of his, I realized something. I wasn't ready to move on yet. But maybe, just maybe, I was ready to stop looking backward. That night, after Maddie fell asleep, I stood on the porch with a beer in hand, looking out at the dark horizon. I thought about Shauna's words. About moving on. About someday letting someone else into my life. It still felt far away, like a blurry shape in the distance. But for the first time since this whole mess started, it didn't feel impossible. I finished my beer, set the bottle down, and let out a deep breath. Tomorrow, I'd wake up. I'd make Maddie breakfast. I'd face another day. And maybe, just maybe, the weight on my chest would feel a little bit lighter. The thing about healing is that it doesn't have a finish line. There's no moment where you wake up and suddenly feel fixed. Instead, it's little things, tiny victories you barely notice at first. Like realizing you haven't thought about Bridget or Ryan all day, or catching yourself laughing at something stupid Maddie said and realizing it's a real laugh, not one you forced out for her sake. Months passed. Maddie and I found a rhythm. School drop-offs, Saturday pancakes, movie nights on the couch. I poured myself into work, into being a dad, into showing up every day even when it felt heavy. One evening, Maddie was coloring at the kitchen table while I made spaghetti. Out of nowhere, she said, "Dad, you don't seem sad anymore." I turned around, wooden spoon in hand. "What do you mean, Mads?" She shrugged, her little face scrunched in concentration as she picked out a new crayon. "You just smile more now. You seem happier." I stared at her for a second, feeling my chest tighten. Kids notice everything, don't they? "Thanks, kiddo. I think I am happier." And it was true. Not all the time, not every day, but in those little moments. In Maddie's laughter, in Shauna's quiet support, in the rare peaceful minutes when I was alone with my thoughts. It felt like the weight was starting to lift. Shauna came over one afternoon while Maddie was at a friend's birthday party. She brought coffee and pastries, and we sat on the porch like we'd done 100 times before. "You seem different," she said after a while, breaking the comfortable silence. "Different how?" "Lighter. Like you've put something down." I nodded slowly. I think I finally stopped carrying it around with me. The anger, the betrayal, all of it. It's still there, but it's not so heavy anymore." She smiled softly. "I'm proud of you, Tim." I took a sip of coffee and stared out at the yard. "I think I'm ready, Shauna. Not today, not tomorrow, but someday. I'm ready to let someone in again." Shauna's smile widened, but she didn't say anything. She didn't need to. That evening, after Maddie was in bed, I sat on the porch with a beer in hand. The stars were out, the air was cool, and for the first time in a long time, I felt calm. Bridget and Ryan were gone from my life. Their shadows had lingered for far too long, but now they were fading. They didn't own space in my head anymore. I finished my beer and walked inside, turning off the lights and checking Maddie's room one last time before heading to bed. As I lay there, staring at the ceiling, I realized something. The world hadn't ended. My life hadn't stopped. It had changed, sure. It had cracked and broken and reshaped itself into something new. But it was still mine. Tomorrow, I'd wake up. I'd make Maddie breakfast. I'd go to work. And maybe, just maybe, I'd keep building something better out of the pieces. One day at a time.